you very much for your critical intervention. And before I open the discussion, I would like to tickle you a little bit. I think I fully share, and I'm sure that many conflict resolution experts and the External Action Service as well shares the limitations of culture as a fuzzy concept to be turned into a foreign policy instrument. Second, the not particularly good track record of Europe in using culture in the long duration of the past centuries. But I will stay in the link between the concept and the implementation of the concept, because I think, perhaps in a good Wittgensteinian way, that it is only in its implementation that the concept will get some substance and some efficacy. Can you imagine of one or two conditions under which culture would be effective as an instrument in external relations?
I think it depends on the state of the world at the time. It depends on the collaborative nature of the decision-making processes. I mean,
within the EU?
Within the EU, yeah. In the first instance, I mean, this is probably something that Mr. Morani can comment on much better than I can, but probably wouldn't want to for sensitive and diplomatic reasons. But the relationship, if you read the relationship between the member states and the EAS, now there are big member states that have their own policies, their own strategies that would limit them in terms of the support that they might give. So it has to be the shared competence that's been talked about. It has to be joined up, and there has to be resources available for it. And my vision, just as basically as a common sense of a bloke who reads the newspaper, my vision is resources are going to get tougher. Internal political contexts are going to get tougher before they get better. I think that they could get better, and I hope they get better. And I say this as an Australian rather than a Brit. I think the degree to which the 27 are forced more closely together in these areas because of the behaviour of my initial country folk will be an important factor in this too. But as I say, I would defer to my colleague on the right on this.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that Diego has to say the one thing or the other. I will ask him to wait for a couple of seconds until we collect some questions of the audience and then tackle them. You have the word after that.
Thank you for your inspiring presentations. Unfortunately, we missed the speakers from the previous section, and it's more probably a comment rather than a question, but maybe you can contribute a little bit also with your opinion on that. Linking public health and what we spoke before lunch, and then security and now the diplomacy issues, I think it's a matter of trust in the society that we are also having probably a bit of a crisis. But the thing is, like in public health, the more you do as a professional, the less outbreaks you will see in the society. And you have to convey that you are doing a lot of work in order not to have outbreaks, and the community has trust in authorities. And I think the same is for security part. And I would have loved to hear the opinion of the colleagues here, how better we can really communicate with the society, with the communities. What do we do? Maybe not all details, of course, but in order to gain back the trust that we live in a kind of secure place. And diplomacy has a big role in that as well, and how to gain the trust the trust of the people that we do our job in a proper way. And if we have some mistakes, if we made some mistakes, maybe it's good to admit this in order to gain this trust that probably is a bit shaking at the moment. But it's a lot of work behind the stage that we as professionals are doing, and I think it should be realized by the communities that the fact that there are not so many outbreaks or that there are not so many terrorist attacks or there is peace in most parts of the world is due to the fact that we do our work properly in most of the cases.
I thank the speakers. They were very good. Of course, there is a European culture if we see the Europe before the 10th century AD, because Europe exists from, from the era of Lebanon. From Lebanon came Europe to Creta. So if we see it in this way, we have a lot of identities, values, and cultures as Europeans, together with the Mediterraneans. But I don't think that security is everywhere always. Sometimes it needs to be spoken, sometimes it needs not. I don't think that we have to discuss for security in the culture. If you are a cultural person, you are secured by your culture. But of course, the diplomacy is an ancient custom to our traditions and behaviors. Thank you.
The first comment is I'm very grateful to the Commission for this initiative. I've been waiting for it for the last 25 years because my master thesis at the College of Europe was about these specific issues, and it was already 23 years ago. So, sorry? But you have to ask the College of Europe for the copyright because I think it's somewhere in the library and it has not been digitalized. So, well, that's another issue of cultural diplomacy. That was my comment. So thank you for this. Just another comment out of it is reading the text very, not quickly, in depth, because I know about the issues, and listening to you, I'm a bit surprised that the approach you are still using is a very traditional approach. Like, what is culture? Culture is an artist, a painter, a dancer, blah, blah, blah. And, but nothing on social media, nothing on broadcasting, nothing on video gaming, nothing on what is usually called pop culture. And I'm afraid that at the moment, when we come back to the a bridge or a bridge too far, raised by the professor, I'm afraid that we are still approaching the issue in a too traditional way. So that's for my comments, which means that how do you plan, questions, to reconcile soft power, cultural diplomacy, and hard power when you still keep this very polarized way of looking at things? That's the first question. Second question, concerning the governance and the audience engagement, because cultural diplomacy, my understanding of it, at the end of the day, is to win engagement from the people. How could you implement that very concretely when it is so difficult for artists, for journalists, for civil society people to get access to visa and to travel? Because that's the first issue to solve if you want interrelationship between people to take place. And this is completely contradicting the hard power fact, the security issue at the moment that we're raising in Europe, and this discourse, we have to control more, we have to be more strict on certain requirements. Now, if an artist is not able to join Europe for an exhibition or a dancer for a performance, I have my doubt about this. And to come back to the implementation, you mentioned that organization, not organization, para-public organization that will be first dealing in the issue will be the delegation, the European Union delegation, and my understanding, National Cultural Institute. I made the work on my thesis on this, and we know they can't work together, even if they try. It's very difficult. But behind that, what about European cultural networks? So the real networks that are building up between artists, and this one, they don't have the security of a public or a state organization behind them. They don't receive the support, the structural funding to work and to travel. This European Cultural Union, they're not part of your strategy. And I'm very, very surprised because the last 20 years, the European Union helped them to be more structurally funded and more sustainable in their activities. So they can help you too at this stage, and you don't mention them. So that's one of my questions.
Thank you very much for posing some hard questions for the soft instrument. So you saw it paid off waiting for 23 years. Now it's game. We have a round of, yes? This is the last question.
Okay, so my name is Adil Sargini. I am a Belgian-Moroccan citizen, so I am a living proof that there is a bridge between cultures. And I would like to link this panel to the previous one, because culture has a role to play in counterterrorism, especially considering that a religion is an inherent part of culture. I was happy to hear Mr. George Bento Silva speaking of or approaching the whole problematic from an inclusive, down-to-earth approach. But then listening to Dr. Christiane Hohn, she was in certain aspects having more of a Eurocentric, tinted with European superiority kind of approach. I think there are big lessons to be learned from what countries like Morocco and the southern Mediterranean are doing in solving the same shared problematic of terrorism. And the question that I have here to our two panelists is, how would you think of the existing diversity of cultures from the immigrants in Europe? How can you use them as ambassadors going both ways to make this bridge of cultures?
I'll try to answer the many questions in the shorter way, starting from you, who are an expert on this. You've been waiting for 23 years, I've been waiting for 31.
Okay.
But all this, well, times were not ripe for this. So, your remarks on social media, video gaming, pop culture, you say we are traditional, we tackle this in the same old way. This document could not be longer than that. We had to keep it within a limit, otherwise, well, you know how it works, it takes ages to be approved and translated. But this document contains hooks for anything. And so social media, we have not forgotten it. It is, on the contrary, one of our priorities in the implementation of the strategy. How to reconcile soft power and hard power? Well, here is just me personally speaking. If we had a hard power, then this would be worthwhile discussing. But do we have one? I mean, this is worth considering, but in another way and in another perspective. Soft power is a very delicate notion. I don't think that we can imagine here for this kind of institutions, for this international organization, the kind of soft power or smart power that we imagine for nation states. This is a very complicated issue, and I don't think we can develop it here. As for visas, this is a real problem, but, well, thanks to the existence of this communication, also the visa side and the visa issue is evolving. It is, well, this is not from scratch, not a complete beginning, but this is the first document that illustrates, describes a perspective of a cultural strategy. So again, I hope it will not take another 23 years, but it will take, in any case, time to develop. Cultural institutes, you say they are heavy, they don't have money, and they are the old way, the old-fashioned way of cultural diplomacy. Partly it is true, partly not, because there too, lack of resources and the changing world is pushing them to work together. We have examples of cultural institutes abroad, French and Germans working together, Italians and French working together, having a common cultural institute where everyone sells his own policy and his own culture.
but coupled with the other one. So, well, you sell Italian language and French fashion, or both. But again, they themselves are finding this way of synergy. So we are following their path, actually. And think of the small countries. They have here a tool for a multiplication of their presence. There is the unique association of cultural institutes. You might know this umbrella association. How could Estonia or Lithuania ever imagine to have their culture presented and promoted abroad through the big cultural institutes such as Germany or France? And a few concrete examples that I think will explain better than any theory. I know the example of Italy because I was advisor to the Italian Minister of Culture. Italy has a protocol of cooperation with Iraq for cultural heritage and with Iran for cultural heritage. Italy is inviting researchers and experts from these countries to Italy to learn techniques for restoration and rehabilitation of a cultural site. Well, France is doing the same. Germany is doing the same. Why not unite and send these people first to Rome or Naples to see Pompeii, and then to France to see Lescaut, and then to Germany, to Berlin to see the Pergamon Museum and techniques learned there. In this way, you give, first of all, a complete set of competence to these researchers, and you create a liaison, a network inside Europe that can be productive, that can, again, help in the creation of what we are lacking in order to have a true European culture, a modern one, not centuries old, some kind of European identity developed through frequentation, through working together. An example of what we can do to help developing countries have a very effective and resourceful cultural sector. Make of museum managers real entrepreneurial managers. I don't want to put market everywhere here. The contrary of this. Culture is a value in itself, but culture can be a resource if managed in an entrepreneurial way. We are teaching the Bardo Museum people in Tunis to manage their museum in an entrepreneurial way. Adding new technologies, applications to the visit, bookstores, and anything that works in that way. Last example on training and media. We fund in Jordan a project for the training of audiovisual experts. We are teaching Jordan to produce their own TV series. Well, this is something important, because you know better than I do that when you see yourself on TV, you feel more real, you exist truly. And this kind of production has a consolidation effect on the Jordanian society. Not only, this creates a market, because Jordanian can sell their products, for example, to Egypt, which is a media superpower. If we had a strategy that we don't have still today, we would have funded this kind of projects in the whole Mediterranean region, multiplicating this effect of consolidation and creation of market, and making these people also able to buy our products, because again, exchanges and market are very effective for the sake of cultural spreading. A few words on what you said, Professor Higut. The European cultural superpower. Well, this was a very provocative assertion from Mrs. Mogherini, but you should have mentioned also, quoted also the rest of the sentence. She said, Europe is a cultural superpower because we managed to make of our cultural diversity an asset. So Mogherini was presenting this fact that we are a superpower as an example for the others to imitate, not just boosting our cultural muscles. It is inevitable that, said in a context like the Culture Forum, the perception of this assertion was inevitably at least partly misunderstood. What else? Yes, cultural diplomacy and culture in external relations. And again, I'll explain the notion with an example. If we go to the Chinese and say, listen, we want to make culture with you, but first you will have to respect human rights. They say, well, thank you, then you can do it on your own. If we go to the Chinese and say, let's make music together, you don't have an orchestra, you want to have a good orchestra, a competitive orchestra, we have musicians, directors, schools, we teach your own players to play, and you set up an orchestra. They say, yes, well, we don't talk about human rights here. But when the Chinese orchestra comes to Europe to learn how to play and direct, well, they are exposed here to our values, to our world. And it is in this way that we wage our influence. This is at least our expectations. All this has to be built. But this is the spirit of our cultural diplomacy, and this is why we call it culture in the external action. Diplomacy is perceived nowadays, well, always, as an aggressive word. Diplomacy is traditionally, many experts said that, an alternative to war. So we cannot call it diplomacy even more if it comes from the European Union. I think I've answered the essentials of your questions, but I'm ready to take on more if you want.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I get a signal by the organizers that we have to wrap it up. I will request from you to be brief in this respect.
Brief. I thank Mr. Morani for those comments. And a suggestion would be that you tell your colleagues who write the Horizon 2020 calls not to stop calling for proposals on cultural diplomacy. That might be one way to do something like this. I want to actually say something just quickly in defence of the joint communique. The length of it, I think, is extremely... When I first read it, and I wrote a critique of it, I complained about all the things that weren't in it. And that's very easy to do. I mean, you know, the fact that we don't make a distinction between values, cultures and norms, and that's important. But what I now understand is that the only way, because I've only been living in Brussels for 9 months, the only way you've got a hope of getting something like this through is not to put so much in it that you let everyone else pick at it. So I actually think that to that extent it's a very accomplished policy document. I think the comment there about how to use second, third generation new Europeans, if I can, we call them new Australians. And if you look, for example, at the Australian Foreign Service, there are as many Chinese, Greeks, Italians in it as there are English people in terms of their origins. And I think that that's clearly a very important thing. You actually make them part of the interactions. I've got other things, but I'll stop.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I have to suppress any other questions. And now it is expected from me to make some concluding remarks, something which I hate. I'm very sorry. Perhaps I will not call it concluding remarks, but unfinished business. And since I belong to the network of this project, I'm not a partner of this network, of the consortium, and a political scientist by training, coming from security and strategic studies. I will say first a word about the concept of societal security, which does seem to suffer from overstretch. This is one thing. And perhaps the implementation efforts right now to encompass several areas of public policy, also comprising education, religious policies, which can be really instrumental in tackling radicalization and extremism, will give some more instrumental power to societal security as such. A second point would be the shifting line, the shifting border between the zone of normality and the zone of emergency. I mean, what you call business as usual, what you call problem solving and crisis management. And this has been a message also by Jaap de Wilde. This is a shifting landscape that all public policy areas also presented today, that is from data protection to public health, to counterterrorism, and to external relations have to cope with. It is as much as an external problem as it is an internal problem of identity when we're talking about external relations and culture. It has to do with a European Union in which all those young people who are in the room today are growing up, and I grew up in the 90s, so to speak, in a different, much more optimistic EU context. Somehow, these centripetal forces with populist right-wing anti-European parties rising, and the post-fact or post-truth democratic procedures pose particular challenges in how all those public policies are being designed and are being implemented. And a third and last point is the role of trust, of such a glue. It could be trust to institutions, institutional trust. It could be trust to governments or states. And the link between societal security and resilience. I was a little surprised today not to hear the word resilience once. It is a word which appears, for example, in the external, in the global strategy 40 times, more than democracy, more than peace, more than every other concept. So it means this is a hidden, carrying paradigm of the current policy making. I think I'll stop it here. I thank very much, also on behalf of the organizers that take up this role, for appearing here and for taking part in the discussions, the speakers and the audience. And I think there is a next event announced by the Source Network. It will be staged end of March in Vienna. Am I correct? The 22nd and the 23rd. Thank you very much. This is the 21st and the 22nd in Vienna, and the title of it is Global Threats, Local Actors. You may pick up the flyer there. So thank you very much again to you, and have a safe trip back home.